This episode of the Seniors Flourish podcast is brought to you by the Learning Lab membership, because I get it. I was working with older adults in home health when I started out, and I was the only OT practitioner. I was new, I had no mentorship, I struggled with the little things at work, and I was so incredibly overwhelmed. I was struggling to keep up with that paperwork, and because I was working such ridiculously long hours, trying to research best practice, find all the patient handouts I needed, I just couldn't keep up with it all. And the worst part is I was constantly doubting myself. Am I really doing what's best for my new patients? That's why I created the Learning Lab, because I desperately needed a way to get organized and have everything I needed at my fingertips. So it's cheaper than a textbook, but it has hundreds of treatment idea videos, patient handouts, evidence-based resources, and more right at your fingertips when you need it. So join today at seniorsflourish.com/Learning Lab.
Welcome to the Seniors Flourish podcast, where it's all about helping occupational therapy practitioners disrupt the norm by throwing away the rainbow art and being the best you can be when working with older adults.
Welcome everyone to the Seniors Flourish podcast. My name is Mandy Chamberlain. I'm an occupational therapist, and I like to talk about everything having to do with occupational therapy and working with the older adult. So if you are new to the show, welcome. And if you've been a long-time listener, I truly appreciate you listening, and I'm glad you're here today. Today, my guests, plural, we have a few today, are going to be talking all about LSVT BIG, that certification course, and how LSVT BIG can help your patients with Parkinson's disease. I get all sorts of questions about LSVT BIG all the time. It's a really kind of a popular certification course and a really neat evidence-based, research-backed, way of treating our patients with Parkinson's disease. So I'm really glad they're here. And so we're going to answer all those questions that you guys have. Everything from can occupational therapy assistants participate in the certification? How does it even work? And things like that. So I am super excited to welcome Bernie Koser. She's an occupational therapist. Julia Wood, she's also an occupational therapist. And Laura Gousset, she's a physical therapist and the chief clinical officer for LSVT BIG. And they are all faculty for the LSVT BIG training and certification course. So they're going to be answering all those questions around LSVT BIG. And I mean, when you have questions about LSVT BIG, there is no better group of ladies to do this. So I'm really glad you're here, ladies.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
I always like to start at the show with kind of learning about everybody's OT journey, how they found occupational therapy, and what they're doing today. So let's start there.
So this is Julia. I'll go ahead and start because I think I'm the newbie to the team. So occupational therapy is actually a second career for me. I received my undergraduate degree in exercise science, and I was in Washington State and started my own private exercise studio focusing on Pilates and gyrotonic, and was doing that for quite some time. And then my business really took a hit with the recession back in 2008. And so it was funny because even a few years prior to that, I got comments from my clients all the time that, you've helped me more than my therapist did. Why aren't you a therapist? Or this has helped me more than this did. And I started really thinking, but because I had physical therapists in my studio, I was really thinking physical therapy, and I didn't know much about occupational therapy. And when I started seriously looking into it, one of the physical therapists in my studio said, "You think more like an occupational therapist." And then when I started looking into what it was really about, it dawned on me all the times that, I had clients that would have neck pain or issues, and I'd be like, well, I want to come see you at your work setting. I want to come see you in the garden. I want to come see what you're doing. And so I really always was about it being task-oriented and functional and looking at how people did what they did and also what brought people joy. So really trying to go from that place of how people spend their time and what's important to them. So I went back to school and got my occupational therapy degree and have been very happy with it. So that's kind of what brought me around it. So it was a little bit through the back door, I suppose.
Wow. I love those, like, finding OT journeys. Like in careers, I'm like, man, wow. I can see exactly why you go back anyway, but gosh almighty, I do love that. How about you, Bernie?
Well, it's actually kind of similar to Julia. I didn't have a career, but I had a real circuitous path. So, I graduated from a nice Catholic high school, and I went away to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I thought, I'm gonna become a physical therapist. That was my goal. And as I got through the coursework, it wasn't working too well. A lot of it was pre-med. And I ended up changing majors, and I graduated with a bachelor's in zoology. And as a part of that, there was a lot of biology training. I thought I was going to become a biology teacher. I'd been inspired by my biology teachers when I was younger, but it didn't really seem to sink. And then at some point, I kind of came around again to occupational therapy. It had actually been my first job out of high school. I worked within a skilled nursing facility as an OT aide. At that time, we had a lot of aides, but you ended up really, you followed the plan of care, and you were under the supervision of an OTR, and you pretty much did whatever. Because we're going back quite a few years, I got to tell you. So this is a long time ago, way before Julia. So anyway, going back to that time, it kind of had planted some seeds, and it brought me around. I went to Wayne State, and I spoke with some of the advisors there, and they just welcomed me with open arms. And I have to say that they said the same kind of thing. They said, we get a lot of second career people, or we get people who, have gone through some curriculum, a different one, and then want to come to us and want to be able to apply it and want to be able to work with people and want to be able to make some changes. And I was always attracted to the kind of the MacGyver aspects of being an occupational therapist. I know you all know what I'm talking about. So you're gonna like worry over this problem, and you're gonna figure something out. And my father was a tool maker. He's passed away, but he was a tool maker, and that was something I used to play in his workshop, and it was always that kind of thing. So that's kind of what pushed me in the right direction to become an occupational therapist. And it just was a wonderful career choice. I had so many opportunities to do so many different things, and I was so grateful that I hadn't gone down the road to become a physical therapist. Laura, I am very sorry. I am so grateful I didn't, because there's so much diversity. There was a point when I was interviewing for a position. It was with an outpatient TBI program. And I had done so many different things at that point. I'd worked in many different settings. I had done job site analysis. I had done TBI rehab. I had done outpatient coordination. A lot of different things, inpatient rehab. And the interviewer looked at me and she said, I think that's really weird that you've done so many different kind of things, that you haven't stayed with one thing all through. I said, I think that's a strength. And I think that's a strength of occupational therapy, that, we take that Gestalt approach where we're not just simply looking at one thing. We are looking at the whole person. And the more skills that we gain, the better we are. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about how LSVT BIG fit in here, but it was kind of a natural progression here as well. So that's my story.
I love it. I do.
Yeah.
I have a MacGyver side note I just have to share. So a clinical educator of mine at Mayo, I'm just going to call her out, Donna Heinley. She was fantastic. And she once said to me, she said, a good occupational therapist should be able to show up with a stick of gum, a ballpoint pen, and a paper clip and do an entire therapy session. And I've never forgotten that.
That's true.
That's a good one. That's hilarious. Well, so then how did you guys discover like LSVT BIG, or how did you kind of get into working with them?
So the journey for me really began with, I discovered my joy for working with Parkinson's in my clinicals actually at Mayo. And, I really pigeonholed myself. I wanted to find a job working with Parkinson's. My husband was kind of like, can you find anything more complicated? Because, there really are not a lot of OTs. And even now, it's so driven and singled a lot of times in a lot of centers around speech therapy and physical therapy.
therapy. But it was what I wanted to do. And so it's a very long story that I won't get into, that I didn't even apply for the job. It was inpatient rehab, but it turned out to be outpatient with Parkinson's. And I thought I was imagining it. And so I show up there, and the first thing, my colleague is Heather Scansey, who is a physical therapy, and she's also faculty for LSVT BIG. And that was the first thing she wanted me to do, was get certified in BIG. And I had read about it and was absolutely excited and gung-ho to do it. And so within, I think, 2 months, I had gotten my certification. And so then I get the joy of teaching side by side with Heather and with the rest of our amazing team, and really fell in love with it. And so I'm the newest member of the faculty. I started 1 year ago. And yeah, it's been great because they're such a welcoming group of individuals, and we meet so many fantastic people, and you really get people excited about it. I mean, the stories that I love are going around, and people really don't know a lot of times how to approach Parkinson's care, especially occupational therapists. They kind of think there's not a place for them at the table. It's all physical therapy. And when they see, how, just like Bernie was saying, that holism that we have, that approach to really treating the whole person comes through so solid, which we'll get into more tonight. But it's exciting to see people know all the gifts they have then that they can give and share. They just didn't really know what to do with them.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been working with LSVT BIG, Bernie?
Well, I was certified in 2008. So that was my initial certification. It was in Chicago, and it was kind of early in the game. So, everything was a little more chaotic at that time with training.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else here on the call has this experience then too, but so I had lots of questions. I just had tons and tons of questions. And the way that I actually was invited into becoming an LSVT BIG certified clinician was through our speech and language pathologist at residential home health. I was already at residential home health several years. I was actually the one of the first people. I actually helped to establish that agency many years ago in the year 2000. And then over the years, things were as usual. I have to tell this story about this poor dentist that I worked with in the home. I remember seeing him. He had Parkinson's disease, and he was rather advanced. His wife would be sleeping soundly in the next room. I mean, she's sitting up in a chair and she's just snoring away. And I worked with him endlessly on helping him or having him be able to put a sock on with a sock donor. And it was futile. It was just futile. We went over and over it. And this was pre-LSVT BIG. So I was just, so frustrated. So anyway, I had this opportunity, the speech and language pathologist. She was so instrumental and so focused on a team approach for us. And yeah, home health. If you think about it, if you're a team in home health, you're covering one little smidge of the whole company, right? You might cover patients in one city or two cities, but there's a whole company behind it. So this was a big risk for the company to go ahead, send me out to Chicago, I'll pay for my hotel and all that stuff. But they kind of had a vision that maybe this was going to work out, and it did. And so then we started to train up more and more people. I was put into a position as LSVT BIG. Actually, I was put in a position as program manager over several other clinical programs as well, including LSVT BIG and Loud. And I was able to, of course, in the meantime, I was treating tons of patients. I was working with tons of field clinicians who were, newly certified. We had the private certifications. We had the trainers come out to residential home health in Michigan, and then later on in Illinois, and even Julia has participated in some of those. So we were able to get a lot more people trained, and that became kind of our calling card. We took care of so many patients in their homes, later stage patients mostly, with Parkinson's disease. It was just a wonderful opportunity for us all. And it was so rewarding to be able to then at that stage not only work with patients and families, which I loved, but be able to work with our marketing team, with our sales team. We had to teach them. We had to, go with them on calls. It became so much more of a outreach, a community outreach. Got more involved in the Michigan Parkinson's Foundation, and attended many support groups, as many of us do who become LSVT BIG certified. But it was opening a lot of doors, and then it ended where I became the senior director of therapy services there, and was able to facilitate the program even further, so that we would be training more and more people as they came through. That was a huge recruitment opportunity. People loved the idea. Therapists in general love training, don't they? I mean, there's not too many therapists who are content with things the way they are. They want to always grow. They want to, establish themselves. They want to, focus on their careers, but they don't want to be stagnant. So this gave them some opportunities, and it was always such a positive. Yes, I want to be LSVT BIG certified. Yes, I want to be LSVT Loud certified. So that was the direction that we went in. And in 2011, I was invited to be part of the faculty, and at that time it was by Cynthia Fox and Lori Reimig, and they kind of gathered up a whole group of us. Laura, you were part of that, and gathered us all together in Arizona, and we all came up with some additional training opportunities, and the rest is history, because it's just been a wonderful opportunity. Wow. Like Julia said, you meet so many people, you have so many opportunities for interaction, and the community outreach is just amazing. My favorite part of our workshops is the symposium that we give. It's a lecture to the patients and the caregivers. They come in as volunteers for our newly certified clinicians. It's just so rewarding. It's so rewarding to be able to take that one more step beyond the clinicians themselves.
Oh, I bet.
Sorry, I'm probably way over my time.
Well, I think it's important to mention too that it's like, where else do you take a course and in real time, like in the moment you get to apply it. So, we'll have patients and caregivers show up from the community, and the participants, that are doing the training have already learned the exercises and been learning the approaches, and they get to, if the people are willing to stay and volunteer, they get to teach them the program and do a session with them. And so, now you've just learned this and you already get to apply it. So I think it's a really great strength. And that's what people say they love the most, over and over in the reviews.
Those are the best. Those are the best
Yes.
courses that I've ever attended, is where you had hands-on experience like this.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
Because I got so excited about talking about LSVT BIG, I didn't actually let you guys explain what is it? What's the population you target? Because it may be a whole new concept to some people. They're maybe not overly familiar, or maybe they've heard of it but not exactly sure.
Absolutely.
So
it is an intensive, one-to-one treatment program that is adapted to the goals of each individual, but it's still a standardized protocol. And the whole target is training movement amplitude. So that's both a cognitive and a motor target. So we're training the individual to move bigger, to really recalibrate their movements to be on a normal amplitude level. Because the individual with Parkinson's is not aware that their arm swing is not as big as it used to be, that their steps are smaller, that their posture is what it is, and they really do have to feel what it's like. And so through our feedback and cueing, using motor learning principles and even the principles of neuroplasticity and the fact of how intense it is and focused and salient to the individual, you're really able to drive that amplitude and teach that. It's like a relearning, a recalibration for them. But I love that it's a standardized protocol, but also once you get into the functional components and the hierarchies, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on, you're able to adapt it to the unique needs. So it becomes very task-oriented and very client-centered in the approach.
Gosh, I know. I feel like it is such a good fit for occupational therapists and occupational therapy practitioner in general, right? Because OT assistants can get the certification as well. Is that true?
Yes. And you'll notice that there's a fact sheet that they can access and the research on it that kind of details, about the program and how to get trained and what a program typical session looks like. But yes, absolutely. An occupational therapy assistant, however, would have to be treating under an OT who is certified as well. So, and PTAs can do it as well. So it's great. It really, and then once you get speech in there too, if they're doing the sister program of LSVT Loud, maybe in companion with it, then they're getting, the whole team, that multidisciplinary approach, which is so referenced in the research and we know is such a strong way to connect with someone and really truly address that holism that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And that fact sheet that you were just referencing, I'll put that in the show notes, the link for that, so everybody can kind of check that out as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So what do you think about, like, I'm just thinking about, like, okay, it's a kind of like a somewhat of a structured certification course, which I think a lot of people, if you're unfamiliar with working with clients with Parkinson's, I think it can be a bit intimidating trying to figure out, like, what is the most important, what do I need to be teaching them, how can I make this client centered, how can I make this, occupation based, you know what I mean, and how do I work with problem solving. And so I think something like that is really super helpful. But how do you find that, like, LSVT BIG compares to, like, the other ways that we've been trained to treat, I guess, patients and clients with Parkinson's disease?
Well, for example, typically I think a lot of times the OT approach anyway is very task oriented, right? So we kind of go to the task and train to the task, which is great. And LSVT definitely incorporates that into the functional components and the hierarchies where those are really chosen by the individual. Do they need to do buttons? Is it handwriting? Is it pulling their pants up? Like, what are the tasks that they want to do? But typically, if you look at in the past, the approaches to Parkinson's care, some of the gold standards were, home exercise programs looking at strength and like flexibility training, and even Nordic walking in Europe. So some of the studies have done comparisons, randomized controlled trials looking at LSVT, the Berlin study versus those others. And they showed that there was really a significant improvement in the motor score, even on the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, which looks at how they're actually moving with LSVT BIG compared to the other approaches. Also, the thing I would say is when I bring students in, and even, the students now are really strong, they're coming out of these great programs that are really focusing on client-centered, task-oriented care, but they tend to not do enough effort, intensity, or repetition. So I think that LSVT BIG is so great because you've got the intensity and the effort in there. You've got the repetition driven into the program. So they really get that. They need that over learning. You need that practice for motor learning really to happen, for neuroplasticity, for those brain changes to really take effect. We've got to have that repetition. So I think that's one of the biggest ways that it varies as well, and kind of goes aside, is it gives a very structured approach to that intensity, high effort, and salience. And even with the hierarchy task, how you build those up and practice and apply motor learning principles from blocked practice all the way through practicing the entire task. So it gives a great structure for people that feel intimidated working with Parkinson's and aren't sure how to approach it. Really gives you a nice framework, but then still allows for that individualization and making it really relevant and centered on the goals of the individual.
Yeah, I think that definitely, like I said, that structure really helps. So, like, okay, so what does a session look like, or what are kind of like the foundational things that you typically you teach your clients?
Bernie, do you want to go and talk about the movements? Yeah.
I sure will. So this is Bernie, and when we first introduced the program, and actually this is where a lot of people come to us. They say, "Oh, it's an exercise program," but as Julie and I are going to be explaining, it's a lot more. We have to hook it into function. So there are exercises, there are core type of movements that we do have, and we call them maximal daily exercises. There are 7 of them. We teach our clinicians. We teach them competency in the movements so that they can model and train their patients with that and feel comfortable and confident with it. But we always try to stress first that they are really stepping stones. They're not the be-all and end-all. It's never, ever a goal to simply learn the exercises, learn the movements, and finito, and then poof, they're better. So we spend a lot of time on that initial thing. And I've thought about this before because I get, when we first started training up, I think Julia had mentioned that occupational therapists may have felt like, well, do they have a seat at the table? Do they really, belong in this? Is this an outpatient type of a physical therapy program or not? In OT vernacular, these are preparatory exercises and preparatory activities that we use. And, again, we may share them with our physical therapists, with our partners who are physical therapists, and we do often share them as part of our treatment approach. We might share PT and OT might share the patient for the 4 times a week frequency that we have. But again, we treat them as a means to an end. And so there are 7 of them, and I don't want to go into too much detail on them except to tell you that they are in many different directions because the body is complex, of course. And, we teach that single focus, that large amplitude of movement, and we teach our clinicians to kind of keep some considerations and concepts in mind. Like, we give them some keywords. We minimize the talking. We do a lot of modeling of the exercises. We do a lot of big movements. We do a lot of big open hand. That's a huge thing for our clinicians and then our patients to learn. We use techniques or terms like load to explode. You want to really model, and you want to shake your patients to be able to move as big as possible and have that sharpness and completeness of movement. So we also try to really focus on the big posture at all times, so that it's not something that's simply a part of the exercise, but it's also a part then carry over into the functional activities, functional component movements, and the hierarchies that Julia will be talking about shortly. So we do have, and remember again too that although these are fairly common type of movements, they are not, they're not kind of random. They were chosen for that specificity. We talk a lot about specificity in this program for Parkinson's disease. That's proven in the research that we have to have a specificity of approach. And some of the movements that we teach in these exercises are really emphasizing the Parkinson's deficits, the problems that people with Parkinson's disease have, such as, losing their balance when they step backward. So one of the exercises is a step backward, so that you can also, there's side steps. As they're moving in a darkened theater, or they're moving, across an aisle or something, they can step and learn to step with large movements and confidently. So there is a real, it's not as one-dimensional as simply exercises and achieving it, check it off the list. It's also hooking it into everyday activities and then bringing it home with some of the functional activities that are part of this protocol as well.
Okay, so what would a typical session typically look like? Would you start with some of those core types of movements, preparatory, however you want to term it, right? And then go into functional, or is it like a step 1, day 1 you do this, day 2 you do that kind? You know what I'm trying to ask?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is Julia. Hopefully I can help. So, before we even get to session 1, we obviously do an assessment. And within that assessment, we're really trying to center in on what things are important to the person. What do they want to be able to do better? What have they maybe feel like they've lost the ability to do, or they've given up? Or even with someone early on, maybe what do they not want to lose the ability to do? So what are their really meaningful activities that they want to center their participation around? And so that helps guide choosing the functional components in the hierarchy task. So they come in for that first session. Let's say they're going to be seeing us 4 times a week for 4 weeks, often in combination with PT. So like in my center, we typically do 2 times a week PT, 2 times a week OT. But let's say the person has more fine motor issues or more ADL issues. I might take the lion's share and see them 3 times a week in PT season 1, or vice versa if it's more gait and mobility. But then typically a session is they come in that first time. We start with the preparatory exercises, the standard daily exercises. The first 2 are always seated and are sustained. So they're holding a posture. They're holding some trunk rotation. The other ones are variable in stepping, forward step, side step, back step. The repetition, we're aiming for, 8 to 10 repetitions a lot of times of those key exercises. But let's say someone's more advanced stage, we might do less, which we'll talk about ways that we modify that later on. Or maybe they're early on and we're doing some more. We're adding balance challenges to those, or cognitive dual tasking. And then we get into, after they've completed the exercises, we always do big walking. Now that's going to vary, and even as OTs we do big walking because for us it's functional mobility. So the time and the distance may vary.
So let's say maybe I'm centering it around the big walking practice I'm going to do is going from a distance that's like the bedroom to the bathroom for like nighttime toileting. Maybe the PT, their big walking practice, they're doing more like community mobility over obstacles, or vice versa. So that can really vary. And then we get into the functional components, the first of which is always sit to stand. So doing that transfer, which is often problematic for people with Parkinson's. So once again, we might add in balance challenges or different difficulties, or we might have them holding on to something if they're more advanced. And then the other 4 functional components are simple, single step things that they're having trouble with. For example, an arm in a sleeve of a jacket, or fastening a button, pulling up a zipper, pulling a sock over their heel. And they pick 4 of those. So every time we would be repeating the practice of that movement with big amplitude, with big cueing, 5 repetitions each for each of those functional components. And then we get into the hierarchy task, which are tasks that have more steps to them. So for example, getting in and out of a car, or getting in and out of bed, or maybe it's putting their pants on. So now we've got, feet in the legs and pulling them up, standing up. So sometimes, it might be that the functional components are part of the hierarchy if it's someone advanced, and we really need to spend a lot of time on those. But then in someone who's early on and maybe not a lot of difficulty, each of those tasks, when they're doing those functional components and those hierarchies, all those things that day to day they need to do, it's like a hook. So they start to really feel how much effort, how much amplitude they need to put into their movements to effectively do the things that they want to do day to day. And then the best part, my favorite part of every session, is at the end, we identify a carryover task. So I often say to them, based on the things we were working on today and things that you noticed today, how are you what are you doing today that you think you could take something and apply it into that task? So let's say I'm going to the grocery store later. Okay, well, you have been having some trouble with your big reach with that right arm. You tend to avoid using the right arm and use your non-affected left hand. Why don't we do a big reach with that right hand to get items off the shelf at the grocery store? So we really do give them something that they have to take out of there and think about it and practice. So it really starts to become part of their life and not just performing an exercise program, because we really do want to recalibrate their sense of how they move within their own body and how they function day to day.
And that's the important thing. That's what we want out of our therapy sessions anyway, right? Like we want it to carry over into true occupational performance, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's nice to have, it's nice to have those cues and just actually make them think about it. Like, how can I actually integrate that? Because I think sometimes we do get like that. We do our treatment sessions and you're like, okay, we're done for the day. And you're hoping it just carries over.
Right.
As a team approach to say problem solve and think about how you can actually integrate what you just did directly into their activities.
So what I noticed too, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that from that process, they really start to, because, even on the weekend, say I see someone on Friday, I give them carryover assignments for the entire weekend until I'm going to see them again. So every single day, they're expected to do their exercises twice a day. If they're seeing us, one of those is with us, once is on their own. And then they have a carryover every day, and they start to come up with their own too. They'll come back in and be like, the other day I was doing laundry and I thought about that big reach. And so I decided to do it then. So they really start, problem solving on their own, like you said, and applying it in the real world. And it's such a great thing to see. It's really inspiring as a therapist.
It truly comes alive. It's just like it comes alive for our patients.
Absolutely.
I like that. So do typically you see everybody when they are have mild symptoms, moderate, severe, or how does the intervention look because I'm assuming you're going to see all sorts of people at different stages. So how does the intervention look from a client that has they're at a mild stage versus more of a severe?
Well, I'll speak to mild, and I'll let Bernie kind of speak to more, severe presentation. But early on in the early stages, so let's say someone might not even have really any quote deficits, but I always point out, with Parkinson's, there's not a blood test for Parkinson's.
Right.
So they've, typically been diagnosed by a movement disorder specialist looking at their movement. So something about their movement has changed enough that in doing some finger taps and walking up and down the hallway, that doctor was able to tell that they had Parkinson's.
Right.
So in that, we call it prehabilitation at our center. We're really looking at what do you not want to lose the ability to do? What's meaningful to you? So I had a woman recently, for example, that paddle tennis. I'd never even heard of paddle tennis, but this was really important to her. She plays paddle tennis all the time, and it almost looks like a ping pong paddle, but it's bigger. But then the ball kind of looks like a tennis ball, and then they're like in this cage thing. But this was really important to her, and so I, looked at what is involved in paddle tennis that might be problematic, and we were able to identify like low reaching, her coordination. Even for her, she was getting some eye-hand coordination because Parkinson's can involve a lot of visual changes and visuospatial changes. So her, we did more repetitions of her exercises, for example, a lot of balance challenges, a lot of cognitive dual tasking. So it might have been her naming animals or, naming things by categories or by letter of the alphabet. I use games like Scattergory, Slapsy, Buzzword to challenge. So while she's doing the exercise, trying to get her to maintain that amplitude while I'm distracting her, essentially. And then her, functional components, a lot of them centered around the paddle tennis. Her sit to stand was often on like a Bosu cushion or, a wedge cushion. She did things that a lot of us, some days I'm like, this would kick my butt. If I get someone who's like a triathlete, and now has Parkinson's, well, I got to up my A game to really challenge them. So it's a lot of fun because you really do have to be creative and think about what are those real world distractions this person may encounter, what are some challenges motor wise, cognitively, what can I do to really make this like they're going to encounter in the real world so they'll know to keep those movements going, to keep that amplitude going. And that's very different than Bernie's going to speak to later stage at how you adapt to really make it individualized for them.
Yeah, so later stage patients, they've already had a lot more practical experience, and they also tend to be more medically complex. So there's a lot more complexity as a therapist and as a person with Parkinson's that has to be dealt with. But people, we often teach, that there's a kind of an ideal candidate for an LSVT BIG approach, but really there is no exclusion, even for our later stage patients. And that has actually been my forte. I've worked in home health, and as a regulation, as a condition of participation for home health, your patients have to be homebound, so they can't be free to get out and walk around. If that's true, then they would be transferred to an outpatient program for LSVT BIG. So as it is, we have an opportunity to reach a lot of people who truly are homebound, truly are at risk for having to be moved into perhaps the next level of care, which could be an assisted living, but it could also very likely be a skilled nursing facility, a group of individuals who might be struggling with some of the basic functional issues that might move them in that direction, such as managing their incontinence, or, they often had an elderly caregiver themselves. That caregiver is not able to help assist them as much. And, again, there's some physical component there to the assist of a person with Parkinson's. They tend to become more rigid. It's much more difficult to help them move unless they have their own technique, and they have developed some self-efficacy, which they can have through the LSVT BIG. So, again, we're focusing on trying to reduce the caregiver burden. So I would say, as far as the Parkinson's or later stage Parkinson's approach with LSVT BIG, we hold true. We would need to hold true to all of the components that Julia was talking about. And I've had patients who are later stage, and again, coming from home health, everybody gives lots of rest breaks, lots and lots of rest breaks. You don't want to get too tired. Let's check your pulse, and I get that. I get that. Yes, they're frail, and we certainly don't want to risk people's lives, but there is so much that you can really push your patients with Parkinson's. And if they're in later stages, they're simply not going to make any movements unless they have that emphasis, unless they have you and really, like leading them on and cheering them on. So again, it was a big sea change for us to turn that around. This was a residential home health, to be able to turn that around and say, you really need to push your patients. And I've had plenty of patients with Parkinson's disease who have actually spoken with me and said, nobody's ever done this before with me. Nobody has. I can't believe what I'm doing. The doctors see the videos coming out and they're like, oh my God, look at her getting out of bed. Look at her brushing her teeth. So you have an opportunity to apply the same evidence-based principles, the same treatment approaches, the same carryover activities. But we recognize that there's some cognitive changes that are most likely to occur. Persons with Parkinson's have a higher incidence of dementia that develops as they progress in their disease. And so, you have to, as a good OT, you have to do the cognitive screening. You have to take a look at where this patient is. Will they benefit from having a caregiver be involved all the way through on this protocol, so that they have an external form of cueing to be able to assist them to be able to get out of bed and do the things that they need to do. So sometimes even, some of the adaptations you might, I know that Julie had already spoken about some of the standing adaptations, some of the treatment activities that we adapt for the maximal daily exercises, and then also, approaching our functional component tasks on a simpler level. Perhaps, we might reduce the repetitions. We'll practice the big walking with assistive devices, and definitely include the caregiver wherever it's appropriate. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I think we all know that too. So we're very cautious about that. We want to make sure that we're enlisting our caregivers at the right time point. But it's just a wonderful opportunity across the spectrum of Parkinson's disease to be able to use a real evidence-based and just highly functional approach with your patients, regardless of where they are. And it's amazing how they blossom. That's probably the one thing that I never expected when I began treating my home care patients with LSVT BIG. They were no longer homebound. They fell out of being homebound, and then you had to transfer them to another setting. So it's awesome. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, but it's like, oh no, I'm going to lose my patient to Julia, or whatever, in an outpatient setting. Yeah, but that's something that we also speak about quite a bit in our workshops, about the continuum of care, and that we really have to foster that. We're entering an era of reimbursement changes, especially for our Medicare patients, where we really have to think about that. We have to make sure that we offer our patients with Parkinson's the opportunity to follow this protocol all the way through. And if it might begin in one setting, like an inpatient rehab with the stimulability testing, which is putting people through some movements to see if it's going to work for them, and then perhaps going to a home health setting where they might get to a point where they can move to an outpatient setting and be able to complete the protocol correctly. But that requires a lot of communication, and we have a long way to go in this country to make sure that we are communicating across all ends of the spectrum, and that our EMRs are lined up. But that is the right direction to go. So our later stage patients, they deserve every opportunity, just like our earlier diagnosed patients.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. How does that work with? I think the other thing that I think people have questions about is, reimbursement and, like kind of just like basic goal setting or maintenance therapy even. Like, where does that fall? Does it just fall into typical Medicare, if you're seeing them in home health, Part A, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think some people feel like it's a, quote, progressive disease. It feels a little uncomfortable because you're not quite sure how to write goals, or is this going to be reimbursed, or should this be maintenance therapy, or what? Any suggestions or ideas about that?
Well, there was a, class action lawsuit. I can't remember the name of the suit where, basically, even for progressive conditions, they have the right to therapy, to maintain function and to prevent functional decline. And so I think absolutely you can defend even around just that. But I think that when you really center in on what people want to do and what they want to do better, and as a therapist, as you become seasoned in understanding realistic
goals is that you need to write the goal around, like with late stage, maybe the care partner cueing, or with men verbal cues, or whatever it is, that they're going to be able to put their shirt on or set up for their shirt, or, I think that you do see that progression. You definitely see them meet goals. So I always start at what they want to do better and what they want to do more effectively. A lot of times mine are based around like the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, their satisfaction and their performance, things like that. I will often do, the 9-hole peg test or things just to get some timed measures, but that's not what my goals are centered around. I'm not really concerned if they can do pegs faster. I'm concerned if they can tie their own shoe, but often I do see that they improve in their fine motor coordination and their hand dexterity, but I just don't set my goals around that. So I think that when you do patient-centered treatment and really center in on those goals and write them appropriately, I think you can show that they've progressed. Would you agree, Bernie?
I do. Yeah. The documentation is key, of course.
Yeah.
And, as far as some additional follow-up and the reimbursement issue that you had mentioned, each setting has its own challenges, each part of the continuum. I will tell you that, a lot of people have come up to me as a home care therapist and said, well, it's not reimbursable. We don't have, Medicare doesn't allow us to see a patient for 16 visits. I said, I don't know what manual you're reading, but that is absolutely not true. So documentation goes a long way to support that and strengthen the argument. And this is true in all other settings as well. And also we have an opportunity to do some follow-up care. And, we recommend in our courses and our certification courses that our patients, of course, it's a progressive disease, there should be some follow-up, right? And so, you have a set interval. You might have 3 to 6 months for some of our later stage patients who are progressing a little bit, faster into their disease. And there's definitely things that need to be tweaked. You might want to take a look at their caregiver setup and also at their home environment. So you have some opportunities to come back in and keep people going and keep them challenged as well. Update and upgrade a home program and take a look at how they're doing the functional components as well. So, and Julie, I'm sure you can talk about some of the earlier patients about the frequencies.
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely try to follow. We tell our patients, you don't go to the dentist once and you're done, and you need some checkups, you've got to follow up on that. So we typically see them at about the frequency that they see their doctor. And so usually around every 3 to 6 months. And we gauge it a little bit too on how likely we feel they are to kind of fall off the wagon, so to speak. So if it's someone that seems really solid with their program and they're doing great and they have great support, and then we might say 6 months, but then if it's someone that maybe we're wondering they weren't, really consistent or compliant with things in the past, and maybe we're wondering if they're really going to have the motivation to stay with it, we might check in with them on 3 months, at 3 months. And we also open the door too that if they start to notice changes or feel like they need a tune-up prior to that, like, to come in and check in and we can do an assessment and see what the needs are. But for sure, that follow-up is so important. And I just wanted to comment too, because I don't know if we said that there now are protocols for a seated LSVT program and a supine. So even if someone is, later stage and in bed, you have ways to adapt the exercises even to them being, bedridden, to still work on that amplitude and that movement. So we had a gentleman recently, it was pretty amazing, that was doing the seated protocol. So you would think, right, is his mobility really going to improve? It did. His walking improved so much, and it was doing all seated exercises, but he went from coming in, he wouldn't walk without contact guard assist and just a few steps, and then really wanted to be in a transport chair, to walking 60 feet with a rolling walker. So it was really impressive to see that. So there's really something for everybody, and you truly can guide this program and make it as client-centered as needed.
Oh, I always love the client stories. Aren't they the best?
Absolutely. Well, that's why we do it. It's definitely not the documentation. That's not why we all do this.
Well, maybe we'll just jump in here quick too. One of the new things that we do to help support patients after they've gone through LSVT BIG. We call them graduates, is that we have a new Big for Life program. So, continued exercise is super important for anyone, but we recognize it's challenging. Just like it's challenging sometimes for us, it's challenging for people with Parkinson's too. So the tune-ups are really, really important. The daily homework exercise is important. And now we have these groups called Big for Life classes that are community-based exercise classes where they can get that social camaraderie and exercise with each other under the direction of an LSVT BIG certified clinician who is leading these groups and not billing it as therapy. These are, community-based exercise classes, but those have been really, really helpful as well to help patients stay motivated.
Wow, that sounds like you're talking about the continuum of care. It's just neat that they can, follow through the whole way. Well, let's talk a little bit about the certification. Like how does it work?
Sure, I can certainly take a question about that. It's really, really easy. We offer certification to OTs, OT assistants, students in those professions that are enrolled in professional programs, and also PTs, PTAs, and students in those programs as well. And there's two basic options. One is you can go to a live 2-day training and certification course. We have them all over the world, literally. Most of them are in the United States, but if you choose to travel, you can travel to Europe or Japan as well. So it's a 12.5-hour course. It's 2 days, and after that, you're certified. The other way that you can get certified immediately is to take our online training and certification course, and it's a parallel curriculum. It's a pre-recorded PowerPoint presentation, so it's the same lecture that you would receive if you go to a live course. And in terms of the practice time, it's all video led. So once you get to those sections in the lecture, you pause and practice on each other, or a lot of therapists like to buddy up and take the training at the same time as a colleague and practice on each other. And that's been really popular too. And then after the course is complete, you've got 90 days to get the learning done. Then you're certified, so same way. And then after certification, it's more than just a 2-day course or a one-time online training course. It's actually more like I would say it's kind of like a membership package where you have access to a clinician account, and in that we offer clinicians opportunities to continue learning. So we do free webinars every month and on-demand webinars, and we have lots of treatment tools and learning resources that they can download from the clinician account. And then we also give them direct access to our LSVT BIG experts. So when they're on the job and, in the heat of the moment and say, oh, I've got this burning question, they can email us and we can answer those questions head on.
Wow. That's such a neat way that you can do it online as well, I think, because it's not always easy to get to those other courses,
Absolutely. We started offering that course in 2014, and it's really met a need for people that are too remote or, life is busy. A lot of people are working and have families and just can't get away. So that's really filled the gap.
Yeah, definitely.
And if anybody is interested in learning more about LSVT BIG, go and check out lsvtglobal.com, and you can check out all the information and resources they have over there in the certification course. And I feel very fortunate that the ladies over from LSVT BIG and the team over there has offered any of the listeners of the Seniors Flourish podcast a 10% off discount on the certification course through May 28th, 2019. Just use the code SRFlourish. So that's pretty exciting too. I'm really excited that you guys are able to offer that to the listeners. And I'm really glad that you were able to help us answer the questions and have a chat today about this amazing program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really fun, Mandy.
I'm just glad you were able to answer all the questions that all the inquiring minds needed to know about LSVT BIG. And so everyone, don't forget to check out the show notes, check out all the links, the resources I'm going to be adding for the show. Head on over to lsvtglobal.com. Use the 10% discount code for the certification, SR Flourish. And you guys are going to be at AOTA, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. We're super excited to be at AOTA again. We'll have an exhibitor booth there, and 2 of our OT faculty will be there, Julia and Erica, and our CEO. We're giving a couple of presentations and really excited to meet you.
So go check out the LSVT BIG booth over at AOTA, hang out with them. And thanks again, everyone, for joining me today. And thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Do you feel like you're navigating the OT world without a map? Not feeling confident or competent in your day-to-day treatments and struggling to apply your knowledge clinically? Then be sure to check out the Seniors Flourish Learning Lab